Before I begin getting into Kratos' scaling for the Norse pantheon, I just want to let you all know that I won't be covering what happens throughout Ragnarok in this video. This script was made a few months before Ragnarok came out, and after having played the game, I didn't really get the impression that the scaling for Kratos' character overall changed at all. For the most part, what I say in this script is just solidified slightly more, with stuff like Kratos being relative to Thor and Jormungandr and so on. The majority of this video covers the 2018 game, and like I said, including stuff from Ragnarok wouldn't really change any of my arguments, so yeah. I also want to thank my really good friend Kratos for editing this video, because without him this video probably never would have seen the light of day, so I'll be crediting him in the description and as a part of this section here. Thank you, Kratos. Hope you all enjoy the video. Now, the reason why I wanted to do this video is that not only have I done a Greek pantheon scaling video for Kratos in the past, but I've actually seen a lot of people on TikTok, YouTube, Verse Battles, and many other different platforms misinterpreting and incorrectly scaling some of the information that we're given within the fourth game. An example of this is people stating that Kratos is outerversal because there's a statement where it has the Yggdrasil transcending time and space. Not only will I be explaining why this interpretation is wrong, but I'll also be providing accurate and resourceful scaling to Kratos' character. This will include his special abilities, equipment, speed, and general strength. I'll explain it further at the end of the video, but just know that I have an extremely hot take on Kratos from the third game being stronger than Kratos from the fourth game, and I may actually have a whole video dedicated to an explanation as to why. Now, without further ado, let's get into Kratos' scaling. Kratos has many impressive low-end and high-end strength showcases throughout the game, with the low-end being him doing something small like moving Tyr's bridge, and the high-end being him fighting relative to Balder throughout the story's progression, and many of the other gods. I won't detail every single minor and major feat, and I will only be going over the most prominent and talked about ones. So to start, I'll be going over the low-end feat I mentioned earlier that Kratos has. Interestingly enough, Cory Barlog, who was the creative director for God of War 2018 at the time, stated that the weight of the bridge that Kratos pushed near the beginning of the game to be around double that of the Golden Gate Bridge. For those of you who don't know, the Golden Gate Bridge weighs around 887,000 tons. Once we multiply that by 2, we'll get roughly around 1,774,000 tons. Now, for an example, imagine a whale. Now, imagine its testicles. And those two bad boys roughly weigh around 1 ton. So imagine trying to move around 1.7 million of them. I'd think it'd be a little bit difficult to move that many whale testicles, but I don't know. I don't touch whale testicles. Anyway, trying to apply the ton measurement to a quantification within the tiering system, Kratos would be around small city level pretty casually while weakened and heavily suppressing himself. An example of a small city would probably be Brisbane City in Queensland, Australia. This feat also isn't taking into account the water that Kratos is pushing it through, which would apply even more resistance, but either way, that would basically be the base measurement of strength that would be required to perform this feat. One thing that I should note first is that just because Kratos has extremely casual feats that are around city level or whatever, this does not actually limit Kratos to his higher scaling that we'll get into later. Just because a powerful weightlifter lifts up a cat doesn't mean he can't go ahead and lift a barbell with 300 kilograms on it. In Kratos' example, he has shown numerous universal and above feats, so him performing a city level feat doesn't mean anything. The most impressive feat that he has throughout the fourth game is probably him fighting relative to and defeating Balder. The reason why this is impressive is mainly due to the fact that near the end of the game, Balder has shown the ability to contend with and even hurt Jormungandr to the point where he passes out due to the amount of damage Balder is inflicting. Before I continue this point, I just want to clarify that by no means do I actually believe that Balder is stronger than Jormungandr, because I feel as though there are some factors that we need to take into consideration when assessing this feat. 1. Jormungandr was retreating to a safe area for Atreus and Kratos to exit his body and mouth from. 2, Jormungandr had no idea where he was being hit from, and 3, the most important factor to take into consideration was that he was caught off guard. There's a famous quote within boxing that it's the punch that you don't see coming that knocks you out. So while I do think that Baldur does scale to Jormungandr to even be capable of hurting him in the first place, I do not think that he is stronger than him as a whole. Not only would it make absolutely no sense with the points I mentioned earlier, but we obviously know Thor is the strongest god barring Odin, as stated by Mimir himself, and Thor is equal to Jormungandr and has stalemated numerous times during their encounters. Anyway, in Jormungandr's original timeline, we are told by Mimir that it's prophesied that Jormungandr and Thor clash so violently that they splinter the Yggdrasil. If we use the mural shown in Tyr's temple for the Yggdrasil and assume that the realms are drawn to scale, which it probably isn't, and if you don't take any other statements into account, the Yggdrasil would be bigger than all of the universes combined, so destroying that would be a low multiversal feat in of itself. So what happens if we do take context and other pieces of information into consideration? Well, Freya actually mentions during the very beginning of the game that each cell strand of the Yggdrasil transcends time and space. This statement better solidifies that destroying the Yggdrasil would be a fourth dimensional feat because in order to damage the tree, you'd have to scale to it. We are then provided additional context to the scope of the Yggdrasil within the novelization for the fourth game, where it's explained within Kratos' thoughts that one of the branches he is traveling across stretches out to infinity. If there are branches that stretch out to infinity, then there would have to be an infinite amount of cell strands within the infinite branch, therefore showing that the tree would have to be around infinite fourth dimensional. If you don't understand what dimensional tiering is, then I would heavily suggest watching my friend Surfbone's dimensionality video, but I'll provide a very simple and easy to understand explanation. Everyone is aware of what the three main dimensions are, which are length, width, and depth. These dimensions are obviously combined to make higher dimensions, like how length and width are the second dimension and so on and so forth. Now to provide a brief description as to what we are talking about, imagine that we have an infinite amount of first dimensional line segments, just one line. Then try applying these same line segments to a second dimensional square. If we had an infinite amount of line segments, would it fill up the square? No. Because if a line segment consists of the first dimension being length, and a square is second dimensional and has length and width, then no matter how many lines we have in the square, due to it not having width, it would never actually be capable of filling the entirety of the square, and would require a beyond infinite amount to even be capable of doing so. Now imagine that example, but with the third dimension and fourth dimension. This is basically what it would require to be capable of performing a feat similar to what Thor and Jormungandr did. There's also another statement in the novelization for the fourth game where Freya, prior to travelling to Alfheim, provides the description of the Yggdrasil where they align the Bifrost with the mechanism. The light that appears on screen transcends everything within the realm. We know through the context of the scan and it literally being stated that the light that we see projecting itself is basically coming from the void of the realm between realms. It would make sense if it transcended everything within the realm, being as that would make it fourth dimensional, as I previously explained. People seem to misinterpret this though, and try to claim it's fifth dimensional, but as I said, it's literally told to us that it's only transcending everything within the realm. Also, before I continue with some of the debunks for the fifth dimensional and outerversal misscaling people provide, I just want to note that if these characters have this level of attack potency and they're capable of defending themselves and taking attacks of this caliber, then they would also be required to have the same durability levels as the potency of the attacks themselves. Now that that's out of the way, we can get into the fifth dimensional stuff. People try to claim that transcending the entirety of the third dimension would have to be fifth dimensional because there's a container to the universe that's explained to have an unspecified and unquantifiable amount of hypervolume. If you're not aware, hypervolume is basically defined as a volume that is in more than 3 dimensions. The only issue with this, however, is that not only does Freya separate space and time as being separate things, but if we take the context of what she's saying, she's basically stating that a strand of the tree transcends all that's physical within the universe, which would be Midgard, from her perspective. Time is just something that measures physical change, so having power that transcends time is actually less impressive than me breaking a drywall in real life. At most, it basically just allows you to overpower some time-related abilities. It's nothing really physically impressive. This is why everything I've explained so far would only be fourth dimensional, being as nothing suggests that a tree actually transcends the container of the universe, especially if we see the bubble that contains the universe being within the same physical space as the Yggdrasil on its branch. As for the outerversal nonsense, people just typically try to claim that Freya is referencing the concepts of space and time, which, if she were to, probably would be at this level of strength, but nothing actually suggests that she is, and even if she was, it definitely wouldn't be consistent with the current scaling that we actually have for Kratos. Anyway, let's get on to the speed scaling. Similar to Kratos' attack potency, he has numerous low-end and high-end speed showings. To make this part of the video just a little bit less wordy than the attack section, I'll briefly go over each speed rating that Kratos showcases throughout the game, and scale up the chain with each new point. At the very beginning of the game, during our first encounter with Balder, here we can see that he is capable of projecting blasts of light at Kratos. It doesn't really require much explanation, but people will typically try to claim that these are his ice-related abilities, but the only issue is that we don't see him properly activate any type of ice-related abilities until near the end of the game, when he absorbs the Leviathan Axe's frost. We can also differentiate between the ice-based attacks and the light-based ones, because the ice ones are pointy and visibly look bluer, and the light ones are more white and pure, as shown at the beginning of the game. Another point is that whenever Balder uses ice-related abilities, his body becomes encapsulated in ice chunks. Now, this is more of headcanon on my part, based off of the beliefs that the Norse people had during the time, but Balder is also just known as the god of light within Norse mythology. Whether or not you want to accept this doesn't really matter all that much, but I feel it can somewhat support this interpretation. Based on the fact that Kratos can dodge these light-enhanced attacks in his first encounter with Balder, he'd very clearly have light speed reactions. To move up the scale from light speed, we have numerous cases where it's stated that characters can just move and stop time. One of those instances is when Njord started messing with time and eventually stopped it completely, which resulted in the moon and sun standing still. The issue with this though was that it couldn't stop the wolves Skull and Hati from chasing them and attempting to consume them. If characters at the time were capable of realizing this and stopping them, such as Odin, it'd show consistency with the characters having inaccessible speed. To further prove that this isn't just a resistance to time hacks, there are characters in games such as GOW4 Ascension, like the Primordials, who were fighting before time even existed. For the last part of the speed scaling chain, I'd like to bring the topic of the Yggdrasil back for this final speed tier. Outside of Kratos having a strength rating from scaling to people like Balder and Jormungandr, we can actually come to a conclusion on a speed rating for him as well. Kratos and Atreus both have feats of moving within the void that the Yggdrasil resides in, and we know through the statement I provided earlier, specifically the one about the Bifrost's light from the realm between realms transcending the realms, that if Freya is mentioning the universes when referencing the cell strands of the Yggdrasil transcending time and space, then we could also state that the void also transcends time and space as well. Moving in a realm that transcends time is far more impressive than moving in a realm outside of time, simply because a place that transcends time exceeds the limitations of time altogether. In the sense of the speed formula, moving outside of time would be similar to moving in no time. However, moving in a realm that exceeds the limitations of time, it'd be as though time cannot be measured at all. This would mean that whoever can move in the void would have immeasurable speed. For this section of the video, we will start out with Kratos' primary weapons in the fourth game, then go over other interesting pieces of equipment such as the talisman and whatnot after. Starting with the Leviathan Axe, this axe was made from the echoing screams of 20 frost trolls, by Brok and Sindri. They made this weapon in the hopes of rivaling the power of Mjolnir and giving the giants a fighting chance against the Aesir. If the Leviathan axe scales to Mjolnir in power, then it would also be capable of performing the same feats that Mjolnir could. It's also worth noting that the Leviathan axe was imbued with Aetir by Jormungandr. Within Norse mythology, Aetir is defined as being a liquid substance that produced all living things. An example would be that Ymir was conceived through this liquid, and more importantly, is the venom that Jormungandr produces to eventually slay Thor. It's very possible that Aetir within God of War also has existence erasure properties, being as after Magni dies, Mimir and Atreus are stumped and unsure of what's going on when nothing happens with Magni's soul. Mimir states that it may be likely Asgardians have to find their own way to Valhalla, but this wouldn't make much sense as Kratos and Atreus both see souls of the dead that are left wandering Midgard. Jormungandr is also supposed to murder Thor with this venom, and Thor doesn't revive or find his way to Valhalla afterward. Although this is a very flimsy argument and isn't entirely concrete, but it's food for thought. As for the Blades of Chaos, in both the game and the novel, Brok seems to poop his diaper once assessing the magical aspects of the blades, and the novel seems to exaggerate it a little bit more. However, Brok talks about how he's never seen magical weapons as special as the Blades of Chaos before. Specifically, it is stated that they're special in comparison to Mjolnir, implying that they may have a higher magical potency than the hammer. I don't want to spend too much time backscaling the Blades of Chaos from the first God of War game, but they have been shown to be capable of damaging and draining the life force from beings such as Ares, who scale in relativity to the other gods of the Greek pantheon. If we disregard the original games as a whole, and only talk about the showcases the Blades have within the fourth game, we actually have an interesting display of the Blades' fire magic being capable of producing flames in Helheim, which Mimir originally stated wasn't possible at all, and that no flame in the Norse realm could be generated. Now that we've covered Kratos' main weapons in the game, we can go over to his other equipment, such as the Talisman. Before we begin, I just want to state that there's so much equipment in this game that we could have gone over, but we would have been here for hours, literally. So I've limited the equipment to 3 of the most powerful talisman within the game, and these are the Talisman of the Realms, the Talisman of Cursed Power, and the Amulet of Fazir. Starting with the Talisman of the Realms, this basically allows Kratos to manipulate spatiality and temporality via creating a realm shift that slows down time for all his surrounding enemies. If we take into consideration the speed scaling we have from earlier, these time-related abilities would basically be capable of working on characters with immeasurable speed, which is pretty broken. Like, you're above time, but these specific time abilities are so strong that they're binding you to a higher form of time? What the hell? But anyway, next we have the Amulet of Fazir. This is basically somewhat similar to the Talisman of the Realms in a way, but instead of creating a realm shift that slows down Kratos' opponents, Kratos has to dodge his enemies in order to generate this realm shift. For the last piece of equipment, we have the Talisman of Cursed Power. This talisman is specifically ridiculous because it allows Kratos to summon mist from Niflheim, which is explained by Sindri to be something that slowly weakens you and kills you over time, and it also just passively heals Kratos while in use as well. Thanks to everyone for sticking around for the final part of this video, which is probably one of the hottest takes out there for God of War scaling at the moment. As I explained at the beginning, this could probably be a whole video in of itself, so I'm just going to briefly explain my logic for God of War 3 Kratos being stronger than God of War 4 Kratos. So think of it like this. Throughout the entire Greek era of Kratos' life, he is basically receiving numerous amps to his physical stats. This is shown through the Blade of Olympus providing him with the strength that he had whilst he was the actual God of War, him having Kronos' magic which amps all of his physical stats, him receiving Prometheus' ashes which is also an amp in strength, Hades' soul, and the list just goes on. With all of this in mind, we basically state that Kratos is far above what his base strength would be, and at the beginning of God of War 3, he's basically drained of all of these amps that he received throughout God of War 2 within the River Styx. At the end of the game, Zeus then strips him of all of his equipment he received throughout the third game, and additional amps he got after the river Styx, such as Hades' soul. So basically, Kratos lost all of his amps and is reduced to what his base strength would be, which is around Ascension Kratos level at the bare minimum. After all of this, he wanders the Earth and visits other pantheons over the course of 115 years, and eventually ends up in the Norse pantheon. It's stated within the promotional material for the fourth game specifically, and by numerous directors, that Kratos is both considered to be rusty, and that the previous gods like Zeus are stronger than Balder and Thor, and is attempting to reawaken the dormant power within him. Since he has no physical amps anymore, at most we could assume that this is his base strength. The novel also additionally states that Kratos' muscle mass has declined as well, and once you acknowledge all of this information, you can come to the conclusion that he is weaker. If you've made it this far into the video, I just want to thank you all for watching. I have a whole list of videos that I plan on doing in the future, and I'm gonna try my hardest to be more consistent with uploads. I also plan on redoing my original God of War Omniverse, God of War Greek Cosmology, and How Strong is Kratos Greek Myth videos as well. I think that they're very outdated, and I'd rather just have them better formatted than what they were. Other than that, I hope you have a great day.